Hello friends, first of all thank you very much for your overwhelming response that I have got in my previous videos. I really humbly accept your appreciations. I am really humbled by your kind gesture and at the same time that creates that more responsibility on me to be more precise and responsible on my videos that I share with you all. So once again, thank you very much for your kind appreciation, and I would like to request you once again that if you like my video, please do subscribe to my YouTube channel. Your subscription will give me the impetus to work hard day by day, and your subscription will also help me to work on my lessons more and more. So please do subscribe to my YouTube channel if you like this video. Today I'll be talking about post-colonial studies. This is a very brief introduction about post-colonial studies. So I'll just give you an outline of post-colonial studies. Of course, we can talk about a lot about post-colonial studies and its various glossaries in our next lectures, which I will do. I will try to talk about the various facets of post-colonialism, and I will try to upload more and more lectures on post-colonial terms and issues and concepts. This lecture basically tries to give a brief outline about the whole gamut of post-colonial studies. Now, what do we exactly mean by post-colonialism? Now, in the historical context, basically, post-colonial is, in a historical sense, refers to the phase of time, the historical phase of time that the third world countries, they were faced and they were left to after the decline of colonialism. Now, here again, this word third world is, a very debatable word, the first world, second world and third world, and how they have been categorized by the West in categorization of the Eastern people. All these facets and characteristics we can always discuss, and I will try to discuss more and more in my upcoming videos. So this basically video in which I'm talking about post-colonial studies, I'm just trying to give a brief outline of post-colonial studies. So post-colonialism historically means by the historical phase that the third world countries have undergone after the decline of colonialism. For example, Asia, you can take Africa, you can take Latin America and the parts of Caribbean, which were separated from the European empires and were built and were left to rebuild themselves. Now, many third world writers, they focus on both colonialism and the changes that created in post-colonial cultures. That is also the main focus. And there are many challenges that the post-colonial writers face. And what are the challenges? There are various challenges that the post-colonial writers face, and there are attempts to resurrect. The first is the post-colonial writers face the challenge to resurrect their culture, and also the greatest challenge is to combat the preconceptions about the culture which has already been made by the discourse, by the political and social discourse of the West about the East. Now, at the first glance, if you look, post-colonial studies would rather seem to be a matter of history and political science rather than a matter of literary criticism. Outwardly, it might mean, but when we delve deep into it, we must remember that English, as an English department on literature, has been since the time of the British Empire a global language. It is today. For example, almost exclusively the language of the internet that we use nowadays is language that is English, and it is this language of English which has played a very significant role. Britain seemed to foster this political institution. In its political institutions, Britain seemed to foster, as well as in literature, they seem to foster the universal ideals for proper living. That was their agenda. In literature and in political institutions, they fostered, while at the same time practically on the field, they perpetuated the violent enslavement of the Africans and other imperialistic cruelties around the world, which as we know, caused a lot of untold misery, destroying millions of lives. So there are, two facets. In one way, on the political discourse and the literary discourse, the Britishers are trying to showcase themselves as the best race in terms of the social standards that they raise, whereas practically on the field they are worse than the bees that they have, they have done. So there is a duality, as you can see, there is a duality in said and done theory. Now, post-colonial literary theories, they study the English language within this politicized context, especially those writings that developed at the colonial front. You would very well recur one of the most writers who developed this concept of colonial concept in the literary field was Rudyard Kipling. And he wrote a famous poem, White Man's Burden. I would rather request you all to please read the poem if you'll get time and research on it. And there were other writers also who, paved this discourse, in literary discourse of the colonialistic Britain and England through their English literature. For example, E.M. Forster, Jen Rees, or the Jamaica Kingard. Now, earlier figures such as Shakespeare's Caliban are reread today in their new world context. Works such as The Empire Writes Back, a significant text, a very, very significant text in post-colonial studies, which was edited by Bill Ashcroft and others, and one more book, The Black Atlantic by Paul Gilroy. They have radically remapped the cultural criticism. Now, then you also have said Edward Said's concept of Orientalism, which was an important, you can say it was an important touchstone to post-colonial studies, in which he described the stereotypical disclosures about the East as constructed by the West. In one of my lectures, which I will upload, I will talk in details about Said's Orientalism, which is a monumental task and is a significant work in the field of post-colonial studies. So that I will definitely upload in my upcoming lectures. Then this discourse, rather than realistically, Edward Said speaks about in Orientalism, that the discourse which the Westerners gave about the East, that discourse, rather than realistically portraying Eastern as others, constructs them based upon the Western anxieties and preoccupations. Now, Said sharply criticizes the Western image of the Oriental as irrational, depraved, that is fallen, childlike, different, which has allowed the West to define itself as rational, virtuous, mature and normal. So this discourse that the Westerners created about the East, this discourse Said vehemently challenged and criticized in his work Orientalism. Now, there is one more writer, Frank Fanon. Frank Fanon, who was a French Caribbean Marxist, he drew upon his horrible experiences upon the French-Algerian War to deconstruct the emerging national regimes that are based on inheritances from the imperial powers, warning that class, not race, is a greater factor in worldwide oppression, and that if new nations are built in the molds of their former oppressors, then they will perpetuate the bourgeois inequalities from the past. This Frank Fanon was very serious and very critical about, and wanted to put across that, whatever we as colonized experienced, if we are completely influenced by our colonizers, then again the society that we are asked to rebuild, the society that we are responsible to rebuild, will again be a society of bourgeois inequalities, the society of unequal structures which existed during the colonial past. Now, his book, Frank Fanon's famous book, The Wretched of the Earth, which was published in 1961, this has been an important inspiration for the post-colonial critics and literary critics who seek to understand the decolonizing project of the third world writers, especially those interested in the African and the African American text. His work is very, very significant, The Wretched of the Earth, which I will definitely talk about in one of my upcoming lectures. Then we have one more very, very significant figure in post-colonial studies, that is Homi K. Bhabha. Homi K. Bhabha's post-colonial theory involves analysis of nationality, ethnicity and politics with post-structuralist ideas of identity and interdeterminacy, defining the post-colonial identities as shifting hybrid constructions. Now, Bhabha critiques the presumed dichotomies between the center and the periphery, colonized and the colonizer, self and the other, borrowing from the deconstruction the argument that these are false binaries. This is what Bhabha talks about. He instead proposes a dialogic model of nationality, ethnicities and identities characterized by what he calls hybridity. That is, they are something new emerging from a third space to interrogate the givens of the past. Now, if you want to know more about hybridity, I have already uploaded a very simple lecture with very simple examples on hybridity. You can please refer to one of my earlier videos where I have already discussed about hybridity, which Bhabha has proposed, and Bhabha put across this concept of hybridity, which is very significant from post-colonial studies perspective. Perhaps Bhabha's most important contribution has been to stress the fact that colonialism is not a one-way traffic or a one-way street, and that because it involves an interaction between the colonizer and the colonized, the colonizer is as much affected by a system as the colonized. This is not a one-way traffic. This is what Bhabha in hybridity also talks about, and that's how Bhabha's contribution is significant, because he not only criticizes but he also tries to find out some answers from the colonizers, and that is what he says, that it is not a one-way street or a traffic between the colonizer and the colonized. If we say that the colonizer has deeply affected the colonized, that means there is some point in the belief that the colonizer has also been affected by the colonized in the process of colonization. Now, post-colonial critics accordingly study the diasporic text outside the usual Western genres, especially production by the aboriginal authors, marginalized ethnicities, immigrants and refugees. Post-colonial literatures emerging from the nations by writers such as Chinua Achebe, Salman Rushdie are read alongside the European responses to colonialism by writers such as George Orwell and Albert Camus. Now, we can see a very powerful conflicts arising from the colonial past. For example, in Rushdie's Midnight's Children, in which he deconstructs from a post-colonial viewpoint the history of modern India. Among the most important figures in post-colonial feminism is Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. Now, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, she examines the effects of political independence upon the subaltern or the sub-proletarian women in the third world. Spivak's subaltern studies reveal that how the female subjects, they are silenced by the dialogue between the male-dominated West and the male-dominated East, which offers a very little hope for the subaltern woman's voice to rise up amidst the global social institutions that oppresses her. So, these are the stalwart writers of post-colonial studies as a gamut of literature. As a gamut of post-colonial studies, these are some of the writers who have played a very significant and pivotal role. I will talk about each of them and their contributions that significantly they have had on post-colonial studies in my lectures that I will be uploading in the near future. I hope I have been able to give you a very thin outline of post-colonial studies, which will give you a direction to march ahead and explore more this dynamic field of literature, this happening field of literature, this contemporary field of literature, and this will definitely help you, this lecture of mine, in marching ahead in that course. Friends, if you like this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much for watching.